All right, my friends, are your solos struggling a little bit, sounding boring, like you're just running the scales up and down, right? Not really saying anything with the guitar. Don't forget, music is a language. The guitar is just the voice that we're speaking that language through. These are some techniques that you can use right away to get your solos to sound a bit more compelling, and a bit more memorable. I've been helping hundreds of guitar players for the last 2 decades break that sort of intermediate pentatonic plateau, and this is the best method to do so. I do have a part 1, and I will be talking about some of the things that we covered in a part 1. That will be below. I'd love for you to check that one out as well. And if you could, like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification, as I am always putting videos out to make your guitar playing better. Now, the first technique is driving that emotional arc up and down. It's what we covered in part 1, and it's by playing a tension. Cool, right? A lick that just ends on a flat 3 or flat 7, drives that tension up, and then, right? And then a resolve. I'm ending on the root note. Everything is good, right? We were also talking about ending on a 4 or a 5, which, depending on what the harmony is doing, right? Right now, I'm just focused on the scale. I'm not really focused on chord changes, but those are a bit more neutral. Now I'm starting to tell a story, right? Emotional arc kind of up with some tension, right, with some resolution. And what my main focus will be for this is a direct repetition. Now, we talked about rhythm in part 1. I want to take rhythm away just to sort of get into this sort of like expanding our vocabulary, right? If I have this, right, I have my tension, and I'm going to repeat the exact same thing and then just add the resolution. The reason that I'm doing that is if I can strengthen that sort of like mental muscle for direct repetition, once I start getting into changing those phrases so they're not so repetitive, right, I have the strength to never lose what I just said. Now, if I'm just, right, right, it just, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of like when I was teaching little kids, and they would just like pull on your sleeve and be like, oh, this is what I had for dinner. Oh, guess what I did last night? Oh, this is what my brother did. Like, nothing that they're saying has anything to do with what they just said. And we want to tell a story. So if I can do direct repetition, like learning a language, I'm going to need to repeat it verbatim before I can start adding my own twist to this stuff. Then that muscle strengthens, and I never lose what I just said. So what I am about to say has something to do with it. So this sort of like asking a question sort of reminds me of like, hey, John, are you here? Yes, I am John, I am here, right? A direct question and a direct answer, but we don't usually talk like that. So we can start adding our own spin on it. One great way is if I were to take that rhythm, something that's a little bit more interesting, not that particular rhythm, but that lick, and add a little bit more of a rhythm to it. Okay, well, it starts to get a little interesting, but it's the same exact thing. What if I take the rhythm and change the notes? Okay, so the same-ish rhythm, right? Same amount of notes, same rhythm, and then just adding that resolution on the end. Okay, that's fine. Now I'm not losing the question, but I'm answering it a little bit differently. I'm putting my own spin on the answer, right? We can do that over and over and over, right? It's just taking the same exact rhythm that you played, make it as interesting as possible. You're just changing the notes a little bit, and you're still driving that up and driving that down. Now, you can do that while driving that tension up. Now it's like tension, and then the same thing, but it's sort of like explaining the tension by using the neutral. We've covered that in part 1, and then releasing, right? Now we're starting to tell a little bit of a story, and that rhythm is cohesive enough where we're not going to get lost, right? Make sense? Now, what you might be saying is, man, am I just going to be like playing like short phrase, short phrase, short phrase? No, this is what I want to get into, is expanding a little bit more. Now, if I have an interesting rhythm and an interesting phrase, right, as interesting as you may think that is, or as dumb as you might think this phrase is, just work with me here. If I have that, right, and then I say, okay, I'm gonna take that first phrase and the second phrase, but I'm gonna make them longer, right? I'm going to extend it. This is what usually happens, right? I have that question in there and I end up just adding a bunch of blah, blah, blah to it, right? What I mean by that is it's like, okay, I want to end with that. Right? That's my phrase. I know what that is. I know how to say it. Well, I could do, right? It's like, okay, that doesn't really help us, right? We are framing. That's this ultimate technique that I want to get into, is framing that phrase. Is okay, I'm going to add a little bit more, and I could even add a little bit at the end, but that phrase I'm not losing. We want to make sure that we're not just framing it with blah, 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 right? Hey, John, are you here? Right? Could easily be like, hey, John, the lights are off right now. I can't see anything. Are you here? Right? Now, that whole phrase, that whole idea has something to do with the very first question, right? And I'm just adding actual substance to that question, right? So how are you going to do that? You're just going to focus on some sort of a cohesive rhythm into that phrase. It can start with just one or two notes. So if I have, right, that works. Those three notes. Cool, I'm not getting lost yet. And then I can add a little bit to the end, but also maybe repeating a note or two in the middle of that. So now I have, all right, I'm still not losing the original with, right? I'm just starting to frame it. I'm adding a little bit more in the phrase, doing a couple of notes, just repeating, right? The same note, adding a little bit at the end and a little bit at the beginning, and that's my technique for framing. So start experimenting with that and never losing the original phrase, right? What I was saying about the original phrase, someone's like, man, I can make this phrase really long, right? It ends up just being like, and you can tell the difference. You can honestly tell the difference that there's some blah, blah, blah. They don't really know what they're doing. And then the phrase that they actually want to say to drive that emotion up and then bring it back down. So try it with all the techniques that you've been doing. I think it's really, really going to be helpful and it's really, really going to work. Now we can start stringing phrases together. Okay, so if I have my tension, drive up, and then my release, I don't always have to put that punctuation in there and wait. Right? Just like when I'm speaking, I don't have to wait at every single punctuation. So if I have, right, maybe add a little bit that's going to string those two ideas together. Pretty easy. Now it sounds like one longer phrase, right, that doesn't lose its meaning because it's two phrases strung together. We talked about that. When you hear somebody riffing up and down, right, and there's almost no punctuation pause, right, in that really long phrase, it does sort of sound like they're just doing this to our untrained ear, right? But really what they're doing is stringing a bunch of phrases, just like we string a bunch of sentences together to come up with a whole paragraph. Now, what does that mean? That means if I take this, all right, I added the little bit of framing and a little bit of extra, right? A couple repeated notes to my first original phrase. Cool. And then even a little bit to the second phrase. Now, all of that together is just a little addition to, right? Or even, right? That was what I was starting with, right? I took that original phrase, tension, resolution, and then I said, all right, I'm going to change that rhythm. Cool. I'm going to change that rhythm and also change the second phrase. The rhythm is going to stay the same, but I'm going to change the notes of that second phrase. And resolve it. right? Now I'm saying, all right, I'm going to take that first phrase and add a couple of notes to the beginning, right, without losing it. Then I'm going to do a little bit of repetition, and I'm going to string it with a couple of extra notes right into the next phrase. And that's what I'm getting. Right? Now we're starting to really work our way larger and larger. Take these ideas all over the pentatonic, right? With all six strings, and get used to this idea of never losing track of what you're saying and what you are about to say. This doesn't have to be super planned out. Just the more you exercise this, the more fun it gets when you just put on a backing track and you can just go ahead and riff. Now, if you have some cool ways that you make your solos really, really interesting, whether it's rhythm or extending some of these phrases, I would love to hear them below. So please, please, please comment. Now, as we're getting used to building these phrases and telling a little bit more of a story, right? We're doing some short phrases and longer phrases. A really cool thing to do is not just A, B phrase, even if you're stringing them together, right? That's what this is. Right? That's still an A, B phrase. So if I then go to like... That's just another A-B phrase. I can take this. Even if I were, let's just say I were going to do an A-B, I really like this, right? If I were to think of it this way. A-B-C, B phrase. That last B is going to tie it together. So if I have... Cool. All right, it does almost start sounding like, oh, he's just like riffing in the pentatonic. No, you've seen this progression go from right all the way to what I'm doing there. I'm taking my first phrase, changing the rhythm, my B phrase, changing that rhythm to match this one, changing the notes. Right now, I'm adding and framing, putting a couple of repeating notes in there, right? And then I'm stringing it together with this one, right? Adding a little bit more to this as well, going right into a C phrase and then back again to tie it all up with the B phrase, right? So now if you have an A, B, C, B phrase, you will never get lost. What is really, really cool as you're doing this is if you ever feel like you're starting to drift and get away from from yourself, like when you're sort of like babbling almost, just try and remember the last memorable part. Okay, so if I have that and I get a little confident, right? I can always bring it back to what I need to get to, and get a little bit of grounding before I move on into another, A, B, C, B phrasing and however it is that I want to deliver this stuff. But these secrets, how you build your solos, right? It's just building your phrasing and your vocabulary so that you can end up speaking this language. Okay, this is really, really important. All of our favorite guitar soloists, what they're doing is speaking like the musical language through the guitar. If you are not saying anything, if you are not connecting with what you are playing, like linguistically, nobody's going to want to listen to it. It's just like this. If I'm just not interesting, and it would be like if I were just blurting out a constant flow of random words, right? Not really saying anything. It's not worth listening to, and to be honest, it's not really worth playing. If you are an intermediate guitar player struggling to get through that pentatonic plateau that we all get into, I would love to help. You can book a free consultation call at the link below to see if you are a right fit for our 12-week fretboard fluency course. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon.